hidden in plain sight.
Hello, and welcome back to episode 2 of Hidden in Plain Sight, the program that dares to ask, what if Christopher Marlowe did not die in Deptford in 1593? I'm Dr. Julian, your host for the series, and I will be joined by our regular co-host, Carol Paxton. Hi again, Carol.
Hello again, Julian.
Carol, as I explained in our first episode, we are co-hosting a presentation of a pre-recorded conversation between Professor Joseph Khoury, the chairperson of the Department of English at St. Francis Xavier University at Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and our friend, Dr. Peter Hodges. Dr. Hodges, as you already know by now, is the author of Marlowe's Complaint, the book that inspired our program. Together, they are reviewing the rival poet's sonnets, numbers 78 to 86 in the collection titled Shakespeare's Sonnets, originally published in 1609. Carol and I, on the other hand, are providing what you might call play-by-play commentary on this unique event. What do you think, Carol? How would you sum up the conversation so far?
Oh dear, it's shaping up to be something of a boxing match, isn't it? Thriller in Manila revisited.
Well, it appears that Peter is going to propose to dig deeper into the sonnets with several additional statements, or as he likes to call them, eyewitness testimonies. Let's see how he does with the skepticism of Dr. Khoury.
Now we're down to the final half dozen, which includes Chapman and I can't think of all the other names, but let's say Lady Pembroke is still in there, and maybe Ben Jonson we're going to allow to still hang around, on the strength of he wrote so much crazy stuff you can almost be certain that he did something nautical and he did something. But now we come to, I think, what is the real central issue, and the sort of this is the one that makes it impossible for almost anyone other than Chapman to be our rival. And this is the very beginning of the rival poet sequence. So oft have I invoked thee for my muse, and found such fair assistance in my verse, as every alien pen hath got my use, and under thee their poesy disperse. So, what could he possibly mean by that? What could this anonymous author be referring to when he says, every alien pen hath got my use? And, the first thing that you might think is that he's accusing someone of plagiarism.
Right.
Right? Every alien has got my use. So he's saying they're stealing my stuff. Except that the following line says, under thee, their poetry disperse. So he's not talking about his poetry being stolen. He's talking about their poetry being dispersed by an alien pen. Well, why would he care about that unless that alien pen is making use of him somehow? And what does that mean? What does that mean? And I mean, I'm open to your observations on that. I can tell you what I think it means.
Sure. I mean, these, of course, could also be quite metaphorical, right? I mean,
Yeah, they can be, but they could also, but where you find a literal application, would you prefer that more than you would a metaphor?
Well, I don't know that, I mean, as I said last time, I think part of the problem is, you're beginning with the supposition that the name attached to the poems is not the author.
I didn't begin with that supposition. I'm not making any supposition about that.
Okay, well, fine. That's
I'm not,
fine, but
I'm saying that anybody who presupposes that Shakespeare is the author is making a supposition that is not based on anything in the text of the actual poem. His name does not appear in the poem, and he didn't sign the poem. The poems were published under his name. That is true.
yeah, well,
There's
you know,
there's a lot of dispute about whether or not they were authorized, right?
well, I mean, the dispute comes mainly from people who don't want to associate Shakespeare with the poems.
Oh, I don't think that's true. I think the dispute started before that. Sidney Lee was the one who said, Thorpe just gathered them up helter-skelter and just published them. And he accused Thorpe of being a pirate.
But
And
again, that's supposition, right? I mean, like in other
well,
words,
it is, of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what I said last time is, to be able to publish things in those days with a master of revels, I mean, they controlled, to what extent is maybe debatable, how much control did they have, maybe debatable, but there was certainly fear from being brought to face the master of rebels. So to put your names to a poem or a play was not something that anybody would just want to do. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you know I certainly have no problem in people speculating, but my point is that one must also take into account the fact that so and so's name is attached to a work from the time.
I just finished reading book on the Master of Revels that covers the entire period from when it was instituted. The position was instituted in 1583, and then all the way through the four of them. And they all Revels, I mean, they're managing the plays, what can appear on stage, and then what is published. But
Right.
I'm not picking up anything. I don't think they had anything to do with publishing poetry. I think that was the stationers.
So my point is that I would wonder, if someone was going to publish something, I mean, would you put a different name, one who hadn't written the work? I don't know. I just, think it's a real question to be contemplated,
I'm not trying to dispute at this moment whether or
Right.
not Shakespeare is the actual author of all 154 sonnets.
Right.
That's really not the question that I'm asking here. The only thing I'm looking to is who is the rival poet.
Okay.
Okay, so I am only just looking at that
Okay.
text as a statement to describe who the rival poet is. So now we're looking at the statement about every alien pen hath got my use, and I think it's fair. And again, I'm going to say I don't know if there are others examples of any of this out there. I don't know if there's another. I've looked high and low, but there may be something there could be. But where this description can fit a specific instance, I think we have to take note of that instance.
Okay.
Now we turn to this, where an author is literally saying somebody's making use of me to publish his poems. And what use do you make of a man if you're not using his poems?
Right.
What do you use? What is it? What could it be? And I think, pretty soon you get to the point where you think about, well, his name. And lo and behold, George Chapman did exactly that. He published Hero and Leander But when he published it, and today it is still the one that when you go and order it from Amazon or anywhere, you're
Mhm.
going to end up with Hero and Leander, begun by Christopher Marlowe and
Right.
completed by George Chapman.
Right.
That's the version that's most widely available. And that's the version that George Chapman published in 1598, which, by the way, was the same year that Blunt published Marlowe's version solo.
Right.
So there it is. That is like, that's the category. And Chapman happens to have a pretty ripe example that matches that description. It's the Hero and Leander and George Chapman and Christopher Marlowe, and that is the thing that matches. And that's the first thing he complains about in line 3 of the first 3 lines of the entire rival poet sequence. The first thing he says is that every alien pen hath got my use. And then what does he say? He says, and it's your fault. He says, it's your fault, Mr. Patron. It's your fault. You're doing this to me. That's what he turns around and says. He says, it's you doing this. And here is when I think you really get into something very interesting, because that 4th line where it says, under thee, his poetry disperse.
Right.
If you go and you look either at the original publication, well, actually, let me stop you here. Let me stop myself here. The first publication of Hero and Leander is the only one, the first George Chapman version is the only one that includes the dedication to Audrey Walsingham.
Right.
And where is that dedication? Where does it appear in the text? When you're looking at the published text, or when you get it online, when you look it up online, the one that you're going to buy, because strangely enough, subsequent texts, subsequent publications, the 1603 version omitted the dedication to Audrey, took it out. So that dates when this is happening. That dates this to 1598, to that particular time. And what happens is it reproduces the entire text of the original Marlowe standalone poem. So you get the title, you get Blunt's dedication, which tells us that Marlowe is dead, and it tells us that Walsingham was his patron. And then you get Marlowe's 782 lines of Hero and Leander.
Right.
Then you get the dedication to Audrey. And after that, you get Chapman's additions. So when the sonnet says, under thee, his poetry disperse, that literally matches that. That literally turn the page, dedication to Audrey, turn the page, under Audrey, Chapman's appear.
So what's it say exactly?
He goes and he starts off with, to my lady Audrey Walsingham, mistress of the bedchamber, lady of the bedchamber to Queen Elizabeth. So
Right.
this is like the first published acknowledgement of Audrey Walsingham being elevated to this position.
Right.
And then he actually goes to making a comment about, he says, this jointure of my completion with Marlowe's original is a mirror of your reunion with your husband.
Right.
He's he's actually, I mean, with a remark like that, he's actually seems to be saying that there was some sort of, I don't know, renuptialization. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
5-year anniversary possibly of their marriage. And
Right.
this is a celebration of that. And so he's patting himself on the back of how clever he is to marry his poem to Marlowe's the same way your union has been rejoined.
I'm of the view that, um, and it's been a long time since I've read the, the full Venus and Adonis. Sorry, Hero and Leander.
Right.
Um, but I'm of the view that his so-called continuation is just a way of using Marlowe's name to perk up his own reputation as a poet. Um, I don't believe it's a continuation. I think it's a separate poem. I mean, are they tied thematic? Sure, of course, but I certainly don't believe that he did a better job than Marlowe, or
No.
B that it's a continuation per se. I don't believe that. Now, I mean, when I've taught Marlowe and I've taught Hero and Leander, I've only taught Marlowe's Hero and Leander. Now, but again, that's been some years now, so my memory is not fresh. Um, but you know, I'm agreeing with you in that by acknowledging what I think is certainly reality even today. But the point is that if you're a poet, want to make your mark, you want to build your reputation on the best possible poet that you can.
Right. Okay. Now we are at the end of the 5 things that I've pulled out
Hmm.
of the rival poet sequence that identifies what I consider are specific statements that identify this particular individual, not by drawing a picture of him, but by
Right.
telling us who his friends were and what he did.
Okay.
And I was thinking about this the other day. 5 statements. If you're looking for a fingerprint, 5 curls on a fingerprint, that's not really enough. That's not going
Mm.
to be enough for any fingerprint expert to be able to say that's definitive. Even though
Okay.
we've eliminated now, I think, when you're looking at the world of fingerprints and you're looking at the world of who can be a suspect and so forth, you you have a world of individuals, and the fingerprint has to take into account that there are so many other people that you haven't even identified as suspects.
Okay.
But when we're looking in this particular arena, there are only so many people who are even eligible to be suspects. There's no Russian poet that we can include. There's no French poet that we can include who came over the channel and possibly, there's nothing like that, right?
Right.
So we have to, and somebody once said to me, well, it could be somebody we just don't know of. And I said, well, he wouldn't be a very good poet if you didn't know of him.
Mm.
He obviously, and what kind of rival would he be if nobody knew who the heck he was and he never published anything? And yet you want to tell me he's sufficient to be a rival for who you think was Shakespeare?
Right.
That's a kind of argument that you can't argue against except to say you don't have any reason to believe that other than that you just don't want to talk about this anymore,
Mhm.
which is fine. Okay, we won't talk about it anymore, but you're a captive audience, so you can't get away. But I agree, 5 things is only, it's only the beginning. It only isolates us down to, it looks like Chapman is the person we should really focus on. And is there anything else in these sonnets that will help us understand whether or not Chapman can really be the rival?
Right.
Okay, and I think if we then say, all right, we're going to, since these are poets, and since the rival poet is not a rival because he's better with horses. He's a
Mm,
rival because he's a poet, and we're both
right,
poets, and so therefore it's got to be he's a rival because he's a better poet, or you are
right,
patronizing him because he's a poet. So then the question becomes, is there a poem that demonstrates this? Is there a reason why? And if we look at Chapman and what he was writing and when he wrote them and you know what would be something that would cause another writer to complain about, would that writer make reference to that man's work? And if he did, would it tell us what that work is?
okay,
Because if we knew what the work was, we might know why he was angry at him in the first place. Now, we've already identified Hero and Leander as being at least one of the poems that Chapman wrote. We have 4 or 5 others that we know he wrote, but we have Hero and Leander as being something that carries another writer's name on it
right,
that's being used to sell Hero and Leander.
right,
So the suspicion is that that's what we're complaining about. And should we then go and look and see what else this series tells us and to help us identify that poem? So there's a statement that's made at the end of the sequence in 86. Was it his spirit by spirits taught to write above a mortal pitch that struck me dead? No, neither he nor his compeers by night, giving him aid, my verse astonished. So that's in 86. That's lines 5 through 8.
yeah,
I don't think that that's actually a description of the poet as much as it is a description of the poem.
mm-hmm,
And the reason I think that is because in Chapman's version of Hero and Leander, he goes into that whole strange inspiration and strange instigation that caused him to write it. And he seems to suggest that it was the dead Marlowe speaking to him,
mm-hmm,
right? That caused him, that inspired him.
sure,
And he has a long passage where he talks about the Empyrean fires, and he climbs to the top of this blazing spiritual heat that then causes him to find Musaeus, another dead poet, and then putting all that together, he explodes forth with this poem, which he dedicates to Audrey.
right,
So that then is satisfied not because George Chapman is particularly fascinated by the occult, but because his poem, Hero and Leander, makes a huge point of talking about spiritual inspiration as being his motivation for the poem.
right.
Are you with me?
I'm with you.
Do you disagree with any of that?
No, I don't disagree. I mean, I think it is certainly in Sonnet 86, it is a possibility that it's Chapman. It's also a possibility that it's Marlowe. I mean, as the rival poet. I don't think anyone has come to a certain I don't think anything is conclusive, but certainly those names have been proposed in the past, and I think they're still worthwhile proposing. I mean, is it Chapman who's referenced in 86? Now, one thing that I think one should possibly contemplate is it possible that there are 2 rival poets being proposed in these sonnets? 86 would be one, and then 78 to 80 would be another. I don't know. Is it one poet? I don't know. It could be only Chapman, it could be only Marlowe, it could be both. It could be neither. It could be just a supposed, metaphorical poet. I don't know, but the idea that other poets are being referenced is not certainly, I think it's a realistic, assumption. You know, um, is it Chapman? Yeah, it could be. I think it could be Chapman. Is it Marlowe? That it could be too. I think it's great to be able, if one could show conclusively that this is so and so. Yeah, it's a worthwhile
Well,
exercise.
I think the process that I'm trying to impose on this is one that tries to remove some of these doubts.
Yeah.
Because I think you start with the doubts, but as you proceed, you have to keep in mind that we have established certain things.
Hmm.
We have established that of all the people we've been talking about, Chapman is the number one person who matches all of the things so far discussed.
Right.
We're looking at 6 separate identifying statements,
Hmm.
eyewitness statements by somebody trying to tell you who this person is.
Yeah.
And I'm saying he's trying to tell you because if he wasn't trying to tell you, he wouldn't bother at all.
Right.
He's making a great point and a great effort putting into
Mm.
these 9 sonnets all the detail that he can reasonably put in without actually writing the man's name.
Right.
And he's telling you his life story,
Yeah.
I mean, he's giving you indicators of a variety of poems that he's making reference to. And let's make the further point that he's actually putting this into a period of time, because when you look
Right.
at the poems that we know that appear to be referenced, that satisfy the description, that gives us the reasons why we think it's Chapman.
Right.
When we talk about the hymns, that's a poem that was published in 1594. When we talk about the nautical stuff, that's
Mm.
talking about the poem that he wrote about Sir Francis Drake, and
Right.
and a poem that translation of the Iliad, which was 1598. We're not talking about anything after that. And Chapman, as a specific individual, wrote a lot of stuff
Hmm.
after that,
Yeah, he did. Absolutely.
right? But none of that is referenced.
Right.
None of that is referenced. The only thing that are referenced are these specific things, and they all happened 1598 or before.
Right.
So that's important to note.
Yeah, I think it is absolutely, and certainly, while it can give us a date for the sonnets too, right? I mean, and it is, interesting enough, it's an argument, there is no direct evidence. It is about, trying to read between the lines, right? You know,
Well, then I'm trying not to do that. I'm
yeah,
on sincerely now. I'm trying
yeah,
not to read between the lines or interpret anything.
yeah.
I'm trying to take these statements as literally true.
Hmm.
Because everything falls apart if I try to make it a relativistic exercise.
Right.
I'm saying it is literally true that George Chapman wrote something that would include the image of full proud sails.
Okay.
I'm saying it's literally true that I
Mm.
can pull up a volume of poems that has hymns in it written by George
Right.
Chapman. That's literally true. It
Yeah,
is
yeah, no, that's good.
literally true that George Chapman did not have exclusive rights to any given patron,
Mm.
whereas other people did. That's
Right.
literally a fact. And it's literally a fact that
Mm.
George Chapman published his poem under
Right.
Patrick Walsingham's name and under Christopher Marlowe's name. He did
Yeah.
that. He did do that. And this is not a metaphor. Now, if you want to look for metaphors and you want to bring in the metaphors, that's okay.
Yeah.
You can use metaphors to wedge certain people in, just like we're stretching the definition
Well, and and,
in.
and having hard evidence is better than a metaphor. There's no question
Well,
about it.
you would agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, okay then, because not everybody would, but having these are statements made that some people may interpret as metaphorical, but they
Mm.
also happen to correspond to factual reality.
Right.
that there's actual published documents that they correspond to, and we're not cheating. We're
Yeah.
not smearing the lines a little bit so that we can no, it's a real thing that we're talking about. And so when we say spirits, well, Chapman used that word. He used it over and
Right.
over and over in his
Right.
in his version of Hero and Leander, which is not a poem about spirits at all.
I think it's a fun exercise, and certainly if we can conclusively prove something, or you can conclusively prove something, that's great.
Well, we'll see what happens by the time we get to the end.
Okay.
Okay, so Carol, in our first episode, Peter gave us 3 statements from the sonnets, which he compared with a list of possible rivals. And he said he was able to eliminate the majority of those rivals by the end of the episode. And now he says that he's been able, on the strength of the last 2 pieces of evidence, to eliminate everyone except for George Chapman. So let me ask you, do you think that he has explained that well enough that he can rely only on the 5 pieces of evidence, or do you doubt it?
Well, of course, as Joseph said, we don't know every single poet from the era, and it's possible, I suppose, that there is something which is entirely lost to us, which is a better match. However, I think what we can say is that of all the poems from the 1590s of which we are aware, the only one that fits the circumstance is Hero and Leander. It's the only poem that George Chapman wrote a continuation to. So really, the only poem that, if we're saying that the poet is Chapman, the only poem that fits the further description would be Hero and Leander.
So when Peter says that there is no French poet, or there's no German or Russian or any other poet that might jump up and have an addition to Hero and Leander, you agree with that?
Well, yes, because I think as well that we can confine ourselves to poets writing in English, because the original was written in English. And although more than we realise nowadays, because few people can read it, there was quite a significant amount of poetry written in Latin. The only English example that really matches is Hero and Leander.
Okay. So do you now think that he can still rely on the literal reading of these texts? I mean, we seem to still be having trouble with that. I want to make sure that as we proceed, that's still working. Or do you think it's falling short, Carol?
Well, as I think I might have said at the end of episode 1, it's to do with the number of matches to something that seems like a real situation and an uncommon real situation. And also, in this case, something that I don't really think would necessarily occur as a subject of fiction. I mean, yes, certainly I've read more than one novel in which somebody steals a manuscript and passes it off as their own. But I don't think the idea of completing somebody else's work and passing it off is a particularly common plot line. And I think it certainly seems to be a very real complaint in the sonnet that this is something that's actually been done to me. My work has been taken and altered and published in a way I would not want it to be.
Fair point. Well, I noticed that he moved from discussing the sonnets themselves to Chapman's version of Hero and Leander, which you've been discussing, and now he's even talking about the dedication that Chapman wrote as part of what he published. I mean, this dedication that he wrote to Audrey Walsingham, and he's drawing comparisons between the sonnets and that. Do you think that that has a solid connection with the evidence supporting him going into the dedication as opposed to, say, reading it metaphorically? Because when you're looking at the dedication, it seems to me it's a little bit more straightforward than maybe a poem would be.
Well, very much so. A dedication is always a form of flattery, and it would certainly be correct to say that in Elizabethan England, a flattering dedication was the order of the day. So, yes, you would expect a dedication to rather overdo the praise, but you would also expect it to be basically I think the word there, you would expect a dedication to overdo the praise, overdo the flattery, but it's not made up. People didn't dedicate things to uh, random made up persons. They dedicated them to real individuals, often in the hope of some monetary reward, but they are very much rooted in reality. They're not metaphors.
Well, he says something on the order of, "You were not married to my muse, and therefore you can allow the dedicated words that writers use." And in the dedication that Chapman writes, he writes about this poem, his continuation of Hero and Leander, being married to Marlowe's version. So you have this echoing of this notion of the dedication, making the marriage more real. I mean, it's almost as if that is more metaphoric than some of the other references.
I think it is. Obviously there is a literal reading of that. A.D. Rate was quite certain that it was solid evidence that Thomas and Audrey were married in 1597 or 1598, and that Chapman's dedication was in the nature of a wedding present to them. So that would be actually another literal reading of that dedication. But I think, quite frankly, Chapman is a bit clumsy sometimes, and I think he was trying to both compliment Audrey and, to an extent, promote his own work by saying that you, just as you are happily married to Thomas, which might not have been true, here is my continuation, happily married to Marlowe's original. And I think that was what he was trying to say. I think it's a bit clumsy, but I think he he was a bit clumsy. He certainly is in his continuation.
Yeah, you have to wonder what Marlowe would have said to that.
Probably been quite pithy. What was it that Nash said was like rake? Oh dear. And of course, if Thomas and Audrey's marriage was to some extent a marriage of convenience, then, and Chapman was unaware of that, then it would rub salt in the wounds even more, because here he is trying to say that my poem is married to your poem, just in the way that Thomas and Audrey are married. Well, did you not know that?
You know, that is an interesting thought. Yeah. Now that I think about it, that really is an interesting thought. If it were a marriage of convenience, and then he's coming in and sticking his nose into it with this marriage of convenience business, that is an interesting thought. However, we're going to have to leave it there for now and close this episode again, thanking Professor Khoury for joining us in this exploration as he continues to test every bit of Peter's evidence against his own knowledge, experience, and training. I must say, I am really looking forward to our next episode because Peter has promised to begin mapping out his evidence, supporting Hero and Leander as the subject of the dispute. I'm sure Professor Khoury will have a lot of probing questions on that score. Meanwhile, to all our listeners out there, please continue sending in your questions and feedback so that both Peter and Professor Khoury can respond to them. We'll all be back for episode 3 of the 4th season of Hidden in Plain Sight.
Hidden in plain sight.